At 2:17 in the morning, the emergency department doors suddenly burst open. Paramedics rushed in, pushing a stretcher carrying a man who was barely conscious. His breathing was shallow, his body weak, and his chest stained with blood. Doctors and nurses immediately surrounded the bed as machines began to beep and monitors flickered to life in emergency medicine. Every second matters. Every movement is precise, and every decision can mean the difference between life and death. The trauma team quickly began, their work attaching monitors, inserting IV lines, and checking the patient's pulse. The room was tense but controlled. This was the kind of pressure hospital staff trained for every day, but as the team fought to stabilize the patient, something unexpected happened. The man slowly opened his eyes, looked around the room, and whispered something that caused the entire medical team to pause for a brief moment, because the words he spoke suggested this was not just a medical emergency. Something else had happened, something that no one in that hospital was expecting. This story begins inside a hospital emergency room, but it soon expands into a mystery that investigators would spend weeks trying to understand. The injured man lying on that hospital bed was not simply the victim of an accident. His name was Daniel Carter, a 38-year-old financial consultant who worked for a technology firm in the city's business district. Hours earlier, he had been discovered unconscious in an underground parking garage, badly injured and barely breathing. Now doctors were racing against time to keep him alive, while police officers were beginning to ask an entirely different question. How did Daniel Carter end up there, and what had happened in that quiet parking structure late in the night? Earlier that evening, the emergency department at St. Mark's Medical Center had been unusually calm most nights, followed a predictable rhythm. A few minor injuries, occasional late-night patients, and long, quiet stretches where doctors updated records or prepared equipment. The staff had settled into that familiar routine. When the call came through from paramedics, the message was brief but urgent. They were transporting a male patient in critical condition, found unconscious inside an underground parking garage, suffering from serious injuries and heavy blood loss. The hospital staff quickly prepared, the trauma bay specialists were alerted, medical equipment was arranged, and within minutes, the ambulance arrived outside the emergency entrance. When paramedics pushed the stretcher through the doors, doctors immediately recognized how serious the situation was. Daniel Carter was pale, his pulse was weak, and his breathing was unstable. The trauma team moved quickly, placing oxygen over his face, connecting monitoring devices, and beginning emergency treatment. As doctors worked to stabilize him, one nurse searched through Daniel's belongings, hoping to find identification inside the pocket of his jacket. She located a wallet and carefully opened it, removing a driver's license. The name on the card confirmed his identity: Daniel Carter. 38 years old. Inside the wallet were several credit cards, a receipt from a nearby coffee shop, and a few business cards. Everything appeared ordinary. Nothing suggested danger or trouble, but the injuries Daniel had suffered were beginning to raise serious concerns. They did not resemble the kind of injuries normally seen in simple accidents. The medical team focused on keeping him alive, while quietly wondering what might have happened before he arrived at the hospital. Meanwhile, outside the emergency department, police officers were arriving because paramedics who found Daniel had already reported unusual details about the scene where he was discovered. According to the report, a security guard had located Daniel lying on the concrete floor of an underground parking garage beneath an office complex downtown. It was shortly after 2 in the morning when the guard noticed something unusual during a routine patrol near one of the concrete support pillars. He saw a man lying motionless on the ground. At first, he assumed the person might simply be sleeping or unconscious, but as he approached, he realized the situation was far more serious. The man was injured and barely breathing. Emergency services were called immediately, and paramedics transported Daniel to the hospital while police began securing the area for investigation. The parking garage itself was quiet and dimly lit with rows of parked vehicles and concrete pillars stretching through the underground structure. Investigators carefully examined the area where Daniel had been found. The lighting was poor, and several sections of the garage were only partially covered by security cameras. Detectives photographed the scene, documented the position of nearby objects, and searched for any clues that might explain what had happened. They quickly noticed signs that suggested some form of disturbance. Objects were slightly out of place, and small items appeared scattered near the concrete floor. But the most important detail investigators discovered was something that was missing. Daniel's phone could not be located anywhere near the scene for detectives. This detail mattered, because in many investigations, a phone often holds critical information: messages, calls, locations, and records of the final moments before an incident. Without that device, understanding what happened inside the parking garage would become much more difficult. Back inside the hospital emergency room, the trauma team continued working to stabilize Daniel's condition. Doctors monitored his breathing while nurses adjusted equipment and medications. The room was filled with the steady sound of machines and quiet instructions being exchanged between medical staff. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel's eyes slowly opened. He appeared disoriented but conscious. One nurse leaned closer and gently spoke to him, asking, "Daniel, can you hear me for a moment?" He said nothing. His breathing remained shallow, and it seemed as though he was struggling to remain awake. But then his lips moved slightly, and a faint whisper escaped his voice. "Check the file." The doctors exchanged confused looks, unsure what he meant. One of them quietly asked what file, but Daniel did not respond. His eyes closed again, and within seconds he slipped back into unconsciousness. At that moment, no one in the room understood the meaning of those 3 words. But investigators would soon realize they were the most important clue Daniel had left behind. The following morning, detectives visited the office where Daniel Carter worked. His colleagues were surprised to learn about the incident. Most described Daniel as quiet, focused, and extremely dedicated to his job. He was known for paying close attention to details, especially when analyzing financial records. But over the past several weeks, co-workers had noticed that Daniel had been working longer hours, sometimes staying late into the evening reviewing documents alone. One colleague recalled that during a lunch conversation, Daniel had mentioned discovering unusual financial transactions hidden within a series of corporate accounts. According to Daniel, the numbers suggested money was being moved through multiple companies in ways that did not make sense. The pattern looked intentional, almost as if someone had designed the transfers to hide their origin. Investigators requested access to Daniel's work computer, and after carefully reviewing the files, they eventually discovered a folder labeled Audit Review. Inside were spreadsheets, transaction records, and detailed notes created by Daniel while studying financial activity. One particular document immediately caught the attention of investigators. It contained a complex chain of transfers linking several companies together. Large sums of money appeared to move between accounts in a pattern that made tracing the original source extremely difficult. Detectives began to suspect that Daniel may have uncovered something significant, something that someone else might not have wanted him to find. As the investigation continued, detectives discovered another critical detail on the night Daniel was injured. He had arranged to meet someone inside the parking garage. Records from his office computer revealed an email message sent earlier that evening. The message was brief and direct. Daniel had asked to meet an individual connected to one of the financial accounts he had been studying. The meeting location was the underground parking garage beneath the office complex. Detectives now believed Daniel had hoped to confirm his suspicions by speaking directly with someone involved. Security cameras inside the garage provided limited footage, but they did reveal one interesting detail. Shortly before Daniel was discovered, a dark-colored vehicle entered the structure. Minutes later, the same vehicle was seen leaving the garage. Unfortunately, the camera angle prevented investigators from clearly identifying the license plate. The driver never came forward, and no witnesses reported seeing what may have happened during that late-night meeting. For several weeks, detectives continued reviewing financial records and interviewing individuals connected to the companies Daniel had been studying. Slowly, the pieces of the story began to come together. But the final explanation would come from the one person who had been there that night, Daniel Carter himself. 2 weeks after arriving at the hospital, Daniel finally regained full consciousness. Doctors confirmed his condition had improved enough for investigators to speak with him during the interview. Daniel explained that while reviewing financial records at work, he had discovered unusual transfers between several companies. Large amounts of money were being moved through multiple accounts in ways that appeared designed to hide their origin. Daniel suspected the activity was connected to fraudulent contracts when he contacted one of the individuals linked to the accounts. That person agreed to meet him late that evening inside the parking garage during the meeting. Daniel realized the situation had quickly become tense. The individual seemed to know exactly what Daniel had discovered. The conversation ended abruptly, and Daniel attempted to leave the garage, but in the confusion that followed, he was seriously injured before losing consciousness. The other person left the scene, leaving Daniel behind on the concrete floor. Daniel's digital files later helped investigators understand the financial activity he had uncovered. While many details were never publicly released, officials confirmed that the evidence Daniel collected played an important role in revealing financial misconduct involving several companies. For the doctors and nurses working in the emergency room that night, it had begun as a routine medical emergency, but the patient they worked to save carried information that would eventually reveal a much larger story. Sometimes the most important clues arrive quietly hidden behind ordinary moments, and in Daniel Carter's case, 3 whispered words were enough to guide investigators toward the truth. Check the file if you enjoy true crime stories that focus on real investigations and careful storytelling. Consider subscribing for more cases like this and share your thoughts about what you believe truly happened during that meeting in the parking garage. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next story.